another episode of Making Sense of the World. On this day, 60 years ago, the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the main document that contains the guidelines, rules and regulations regarding embassies and diplomatic relations, was put into force. It was a historic day in the field of international relations. Embassies are an important medium through which diplomacy is conducted. They are the physical manifestations of countries abroad, and they are crucial tools in the field of international relations. On this occasion, I will talk about the inner workings of embassies and the laws and politics that inevitably come with it hand in hand. Without further ado, let's start. One common misconception about embassies is that the building, that is the office of the diplomatic staff, is the embassy. Contrary to this, an embassy is actually the people working in the building, i.e. diplomatic staff. The building that houses the embassy is actually called a chancery. Another common misconception about embassies is that they are the sovereign territory of the country they represent. This is not the case. It is also not the case that embassy buildings are in a state of extraterritoriality, that local laws don't apply there, as would be the case in the UN headquarters in New York. In the case of embassy buildings, it's not that the local laws don't apply there, it's the fact that most of the people working in the embassy, the diplomats, cannot be prosecuted for violating these laws, and those that enforce the law, the police, cannot enter. We can understand these guidelines and rules better after we understand the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Every UN member state, except for South Sudan, Palau, and the Solomon Islands, have signed the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. This document lays down the rules and regulations of diplomatic missions. Perhaps the most important and well-known is Article 22, part of which states, "The premises of the mission shall be inviolable." This means that, unless invited by the ambassador or their government, any representative of the host country cannot enter the embassy or the residence of the ambassador. It was because of this law that Julian Assange stayed in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 7 years. He entered in 2012 when he was wanted by the British for extradition to and subsequent arrest in Sweden. Assange stayed in the embassy while his request for Ecuadorian political asylum was reviewed. And when it was granted, he intended to go to Ecuador. But British police waited outside the embassy and they would arrest him if he attempted to reach the airport. So, after 7 years, the Ecuadorians thought that Assange had overstayed his welcome and invited the British police inside, who arrested him. The Vienna Convention also lays out certain other important rules and guidelines for embassies. All diplomats and the embassy are exempt from taxes by the host country. The diplomats are allowed free movement around the host country. An embassy can have diplomatic couriers carrying diplomatic bags which cannot be seized or searched. Diplomats are granted diplomatic immunity. The residences of the diplomats are also treated as an extension of the embassy and cannot be entered without permission. Diplomats cannot work or earn a profit when in their host country except for with the embassy, etc., etc. Now let's talk about the privileges that diplomats receive when abroad, most important of which is diplomatic immunity. Part 1 of Article 31 of the Vienna Convention states, "A diplomatic agent shall enjoy immunity from the criminal jurisdiction of the receiving state. He shall also enjoy immunity from its civil and administrative jurisdiction." Of course, many diplomats have misused this rule. One of the most famous cases involving diplomatic immunity was the death of Metropolitan Police Officer Yvonne Fletcher, who, among other people, was shot dead from the window of the Libyan embassy in London in 1984. After an 11-day siege at the embassy, all those inside made their way out and were granted diplomatic immunity. But it is generally not in the best interest of a diplomat to anger their host country and commit crimes this way, as they are there to build friendly relations. And also, a country can expel diplomats back to their host country. So, such cases are rare. I will conclude this episode and share the infamous storming of the US Embassy in Tehran in 1979, resulting in the hostage taking of American diplomats for over 444 days. On the one hand, the act shows that the embassies are not that inviolable after all. But on the other hand, it also shows how seriously nations take the violation of the embassy, as the hostage incident of over 40 years back still continues to cast a dark shadow on the relationship between the US and Iran to this day.